My daddy is a hero. He helps me grow up strong.
Oh, no, I gotta fall!
There is a name that has sat at the edge of one of the most documented murder cases in American true crime history for nearly 7 years. Not in the shadows, not hidden from public record, but sitting openly inside the official discovery file, confirmed by law enforcement, acknowledged by the district attorney who prosecuted the case, and never fully examined in any official capacity. That name is Nichole Kessinger, and before this narration is finished, you will understand why the question of her role has never truly been answered, and why the answer matters more now than it ever has. This is not speculation. This is not theory. Everything presented here comes directly from documented sources, official discovery records, confirmed interviews, and verified forensic data. The gaps in this story are not invented. They were created by the investigation itself, and they have been sitting in plain sight ever since. If you are new to Brian Crime TV, this is the kind of deep, evidence-based storytelling we bring to every case we cover. Hit that subscribe button now so you do not miss a single part of this series, because what this documentary walks through cannot be understood in one sitting. There is too much documented evidence, and every layer changes the one before it. Now, August 13th, 2018. Frederick, Colorado, a quiet residential neighborhood in Weld County where a 34-year-old woman named Shanann Watts lived with her husband Chris and their 2 daughters, 4-year-old Bella and 3-year-old Celeste. Shanann was 15 weeks pregnant with a boy the couple had publicly announced they planned to name Nico. By the morning of August 13th, all 4 of them were dead. Chris Watts killed his wife and daughters in the early hours of that Monday morning. He strangled Shanann in their bedroom, smothered both girls, loaded all 3 bodies into his work truck, and drove approximately 45 minutes to a remote Anadarko petroleum oil field site known as CERVI-319. He buried Shanann in a shallow grave near the site and submerged the bodies of Bella and Celeste in separate crude oil storage tanks. He then drove back, went through the motions of an ordinary workday, and that same evening stood on his front lawn in front of news cameras, pleading publicly for his family's return. Within 72 hours, he had confessed. Within 3 months, he had pleaded guilty to 5 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of unlawful termination of a pregnancy, and 3 counts of tampering with a deceased human body. He was sentenced to 5 consecutive life sentences without the possibility of parole, plus an additional 48 years. No trial took place. The case was officially closed. But closing a case and answering every question it raises are 2 entirely different things. And the questions this case left unanswered were not minor procedural footnotes. They were documented, confirmed, time-stamped, and contained inside the very discovery file the prosecution used to build its case against Chris Watts. They were raised by journalists, by researchers, and by the district attorney's own public statements. And they were never resolved, because a guilty plea meant the investigation stopped moving forward at the exact moment it should have kept going. One of those questions has a name attached to it: Nichole Kessinger. She was Chris Watts' girlfriend at the time of the murders. She held a Bachelor of Science in Geology from Colorado State University and worked as a field engineer through Tasman Geosciences, a company contracted directly to Anadarko Petroleum, the same company that employed Chris as an operator. She understood the oilfield environment from the inside. She knew the structure, the roles, the responsibilities, and the internal hierarchy of who did what on a site like CERVI-319. She was not a peripheral figure brought in from outside this world. She was embedded in it. Their relationship, according to what she told investigators across 6 separate recorded interviews, began in June 2018. She said she met Chris at work. She said he told her he was in the process of separating from his wife. She said she genuinely believed she was not involved with a married man in an active marriage. She cooperated with law enforcement. She was classified as a witness. She was never charged with any crime. The official record placed her in the category of someone who told the truth and had nothing to hide. But the official record also contains something else, and what it contains does not match the account she gave. Begin with her own phone. On July 24th, 2018, weeks into what she described as a relationship with a man she believed was separating from his wife, her device ran a search. The phrase she typed was not about a separation process. It was not about divorce proceedings or custody arrangements or any of the practical questions someone might ask if they genuinely believed they were involved with a man transitioning out of a marriage. The phrase she searched described a man she was having an affair with. That was her word. That was her search. That came from her phone. On August 4th, 2018, while Chris was in North Carolina on a family trip with Shanann and the girls, Kessinger spent approximately 2 hours browsing wedding dresses online. That same afternoon, she searched both Chris and Shanann Watts on Facebook. Shanann's pregnancy had been publicly announced on social media weeks before that date. The announcement was visible on her profile. It was there on August 4th when Kessinger visited that page. In all 6 of her recorded interviews with law enforcement, Kessinger stated clearly and consistently that she had absolutely no idea Shanann was pregnant. She said that learning about the pregnancy through news coverage after the family was reported missing was among the most shocking and devastating moments of her life. She said that if she had known about the baby, she would never have been involved in the relationship at all. She was on Shanann's Facebook page on August 4th. The announcement was public. The announcement was visible. She was there. 4 days later, on August 8th, her phone ran another search. This time the phrase she typed included the word mistress. Her language again, her phone again, her understanding of exactly what her position in this situation was. 3 searches across 3 separate dates, all using her own terminology, all on record, and none of them consistent with the account she provided across 6 formal interviews with investigators. Now to the detail that was publicly confirmed by the District Attorney of Weld County and then never formally pursued. Forensic analysis of Nichole Kessinger's phone revealed that she had been searching Shanann Watts by name as early as January 2018. That date matters enormously because the relationship she described to investigators did not begin until June of that year. That is a 5-month gap between the documented search and the timeline she provided. 5 months during which, according to her own account, she had no meaningful connection to Chris Watts and no reason to be searching his wife's name. One outlet reported that a records supervisor at the Frederick Police Department suggested this may have been a clerical error, that the date might actually have read September 2018 rather than January. That account is part of the public record, and it is included here because full transparency requires acknowledging every explanation that exists. But D.A. Michael Rourke, the Weld County prosecutor who built and closed this case, was pressed directly by reporters on this specific data point. His response was documented. He confirmed that the data came directly from the phone. He stated it was not a reporting error. When asked why the discrepancy had never been independently investigated, he said that because Chris Watts entered a guilty plea, the investigation did not continue to that point. A records supervisor speaking informally to a journalist and a district attorney confirming specific data on the public record are not equivalent sources. One carries legal weight, one does not. And the DA's explanation that the investigation stopped because a conviction had already been secured is a procedural answer. It is not the same as saying the question was resolved. It is saying the question was set aside. There is one more documented detail from this same period that has received far less attention than it deserves. While Shanann Watts was still alive, before August 13th, Chris Watts made contact with a real estate agent to discuss selling the family home. Not searching for his own separate apartment as part of a separation process. Not consulting a divorce attorney about asset division. Selling the home his wife and daughters were living in. Whatever future Chris was planning in the weeks before August 13th, the preliminary steps were already being taken. Now move forward to the days surrounding the crime itself. because the behavior documented during that window goes far beyond anything that could be explained by grief, shock, or the ordinary disorientation of someone learning that a person they cared about had committed an unthinkable act. For 7 years, a particular version of Nichole Kessinger has circulated in public coverage of this case. She came forward voluntarily. She cooperated fully. She had nothing to hide and nothing to conceal. The documented timeline surrounding her decision to contact investigators tells a more complicated story. On the morning of August 15, 2018, at 5 o'clock, CBI agent Tammy Lee received a call from the security manager at Anadarko Petroleum. That security manager told investigators that a contracted employee had been exchanging messages with their primary suspect. He gave 2 names, Chris Watts and Nichole Kessinger. Law enforcement had her name, her identity, and her connection to the suspect before she made a single move in their direction. At 9:50 that same morning, nearly 3 hours after that call was received, Kessinger contacted investigators. On that exact same day, while presenting herself as someone who was voluntarily cooperating with an active investigation into a missing family, her phone was conducting a very specific set of searches. She searched how long phone companies retain text message records. She searched what investigators are able to access from content that has been deleted. She searched the legal distinction between the existence of a message and its actual content. After conducting those searches, she deleted every one of them. But that was not where the deletions began. On August 14th, the day before she contacted anyone, before she reached out to investigators, before the name Kessinger appeared anywhere in the official record, she had already cleared her entire phone. Every message, every photograph, every contact, every email, every piece of content connecting her name to Chris Watts was gone. She then reportedly told Chris to do the same on his end. She also contacted her close friend Charlotte, who had received photographs of Chris and detailed personal conversations about him, and directed Charlotte to remove their entire thread. When investigator Kobach raised the clearing of the phone directly in her second recorded interview, Kessinger explained that she was disgusted by Chris Watts and did not want his name on her device. That explanation was accepted. The interview moved on. Removing material that may be relevant to an active investigation is not an insignificant action, regardless of the emotional reasoning offered to explain it. It was confirmed. It was documented inside the discovery record, and the explanation that was offered for it was accepted without further examination. Now, to the single most forensically specific piece of evidence in the first half of this case. A detail that has not been adequately addressed in public coverage despite being drawn entirely from law enforcement's own documented records. Investigators subpoenaed months of Nichole Kessinger's phone records as part of the missing persons investigation. The cell tower data contained within those records mapped her daily commute to work with extraordinary consistency. Same roads used morning after morning, same towers activated in the same sequence. A reliable, repetitive pattern established across months of documented movement without a single meaningful deviation. Until August 13, 2018. At 6:16 that morning, her phone connected to a cell tower it had never once connected to in all those months of prior records. Not once before that date. The location that tower covered placed her device in the vicinity of the Watts family home in Frederick, Colorado. That is the same address she had searched on Google less than 36 hours before that tower ping was recorded. Chris Watts had left that address at approximately 5:45 in the morning. A surveillance camera owned by neighbor Nate Trinastich, positioned directly toward the Watts driveway, had captured footage of Chris at his truck in the early morning darkness. That footage later became a significant piece of the investigation. Investigators sat with Chris inside Trenastich's home and watched it together in real time. By 6:16, Chris was already on the highway heading northeast. His phone's location data tracked him moving away from Frederick along that route. Her phone was near his house. At the moment that tower registered her device, she placed a call, not to Chris Watts, to a man identified in the discovery records as Jim. Jim was not a stranger to either of them. Records from the investigation included photographs showing all three individuals together at the Colorado sand dunes. He existed within the shared social world that Chris and Nichole occupied together. Days after August 13th, Detective Kobach asked Kessinger directly whether Jim could confirm her location during that morning. The question was straightforward. One phone call could have resolved it. One conversation with one person who knew both of them could have established where she was and when. She told Kobach it would not be fair to involve him. Kobach did not press the point. He moved to another topic. Her location between 5:45 and 8 o'clock on the morning of August 13th, 2018, was never formally established in any of her 6 recorded interviews. It was never independently verified through any external source. No official account of her movements during those hours exists anywhere in the documented record. After August 13th, her phone never connected to that Frederick Tower again. Not the following day. Not the day after that. Not at any point. Because after August 13th, there was no reason for her to be near that house. There had not been a reason before August 13th either, and yet on that one specific morning, the pattern broke in a way it never broke on any other day. Anadarko Petroleum maintained security cameras covering its employee parking lot. Footage from those cameras could have provided an objective, time-stamped record of exactly when Kessinger arrived at work on the morning of August 13th. That footage was never produced as verified evidence within this investigation. In her first interview, Kessinger mentioned what time she clocked out that day. She did not mention what time she clocked in. No investigator across any of her 6 recorded sessions ever asked her that question. In 2025, a book was published by Dylan Tolman, a man who spent approximately 7 months in the prison cell directly adjacent to Chris Watts. Tolman writes that on the night of August 12, 2018, a phone call between Chris Watts and Nichole Kessinger lasted 111 minutes. According to Tolman's account, during that call, she issued an ultimatum. It was his family or it was her. That specific phone call and what was said during it cannot be independently confirmed through external sources. But the book's published description goes further than the ultimatum. It states that Chris Watts admitted to having an accomplice in the murders of his family. The word accomplice has never appeared in any official court document, any prosecution filing, or any legal record connected to this case in its entire history. The cell tower data from August 13th was not created by Dylan Tolman. The anomalous ping was not invented by a cellmate recounting prison conversations. That piece of forensic evidence was sitting inside the official discovery file years before Tolman's book existed. It was documented, time-stamped, and produced by the same law enforcement investigation that classified Nichole Kessinger as a cooperating witness. Now, to the detail that serious researchers return to more than any other in the documented record, because it is specific in a way that cannot be easily dismissed. In her very first recorded interview with investigators, Kessinger described Chris going to the oil field site on the morning of August 13th as routine, normal operations, nothing that stood out or required explanation. She presented herself in that session as someone who had no particular awareness of what his movements that morning meant or why that specific site might be significant. 6 days later, after investigators had obtained and reviewed her phone records, her account changed. In a subsequent interview, she recalled with considerable detail a conversation from the night before August 13th, in which she had specifically questioned why Chris needed to go to CERVI 319 first thing that Monday morning. Her documented words, as recorded by investigators, stated that it was not his job, that he had no operational reason to check the release at that site, and that the task in question belonged to the environmental team rather than to an operator in his role. That is not a question someone asks from passing familiarity with an industry. It requires specific understanding of how responsibilities are divided across different roles at an oil field site. It requires knowing what an operator does on a daily basis versus what falls under the environmental team's scope of work. It requires recognizing that a visit to a particular site for a particular purpose would fall entirely outside the normal duties of someone in Chris Watts' position. A person with a Bachelor of Science in Geology, working as a field engineer in that exact contracting environment, would understand all of those distinctions clearly, precisely, and without ambiguity. She knew that visit was outside his normal scope. She knew it before the investigation told her it mattered. She knew it before investigators had publicly disclosed anything about what happened at that site. And she knew it with the kind of technical specificity that only comes from genuine professional familiarity with how those operations work. Then came the evening of August 13th. Hours after Chris had been at CERV I-319. Hours after everything that had already taken place at that location that morning. Kessinger sent him a text message. She asked him to send her a photograph, specifically documented proof that he had been at CERV I-319 that day. Investigators reviewed months of communication between the two of them. Every text, every call, every exchange, going back across the full documented length of their relationship. In that entire record, there is not a single other occasion on which she asked Chris Watts to photograph his location on a workday. Not once. Not at any other site. Not on any other morning. August 13th was the only time. And on August 13th, she asked for photographic confirmation that he had been exactly where he had been. That request was sent on the same day the Watts family was reported missing. That request was sent on the same day the investigation began. That request was documented by investigators who reviewed the complete communications record between the two of them and confirmed it had no precedent in their documented history. What this first part of the documentary has walked through is not a theory assembled from circumstantial impressions. It is a sequence of documented events drawn from official discovery materials, forensic phone records, cell tower data, recorded interview transcripts, and publicly confirmed statements made by the district attorney who prosecuted this case. Each piece of that sequence exists independently. Each piece was confirmed by the investigation itself. What was never confirmed, and what the official record acknowledges without resolving, is what those pieces mean when they are placed in sequence and read together. A 5-month gap between a documented search and the timeline she provided. Search terms on her own device using her own language that contradict the account she gave in 6 formal interviews. A Facebook visit to Shanann's profile on the day the pregnancy announcement was publicly visible, followed by statements that learning about the pregnancy was among the most shocking moments of her life. A phone cleared of all content the day before she contacted investigators. A search on the day she contacted investigators into what law enforcement can access from deleted records, followed by the deletion of those searches. A cell tower ping, placing her device near the family home on the one morning that mattered, at a tower her phone had never before connected to and never connected to again. An alibi witness she declined to allow investigators to contact. A parking lot camera that could have established her arrival time and was never verified. A detailed technical question about a specific oil field site that she did not recall in her first interview, and then recalled with precision in her second. And a request for photographic proof of a location sent on the day a family disappeared, with no equivalent request anywhere else in months of documented communication. Every one of those details was documented by the investigation. None of them were fabricated. All of them were noted. And the record shows clearly that many of them were not fully pursued because the case was closed the moment Chris Watts entered his guilty plea, and closing a case is not the same as finishing the work the evidence required. There is more to this story. The second part of this documentary continues where this one ends, and the evidence it presents has received even less public attention than what has been covered here. The questions do not get smaller. They get more specific, more documented, and harder to explain away. If this is your first time watching Brine Crime TV, now is the time to subscribe. This channel exists to go where the official record stops and ask the questions that never received the answers they were owed. Like this video if it gave you something to think about, because it helps more people find this series who have been asking the same questions you are. This case has been sitting inside a discovery file for nearly 8 years, confirmed and documented, and largely unexamined. That changes now. On the night of August 13th, 2018, the Watts family had been publicly reported missing for hours. A statewide alert had been issued. Photographs of Shanann, Bella, and Celeste were circulating across local news broadcasts and social media feeds. The investigation was active, visible, and moving. And between 9:48 in the evening and 2:18 in the morning, phone records show that Nichole Kessinger and Chris Watts connected across multiple calls. The total combined duration of those calls adds up to 156 minutes. 2 hours and 36 minutes of conversation on the single most significant night in the entire investigation. When Detective Kobach walked Kessinger through those calls in a subsequent interview, reading the timestamps aloud, noting the duration of each exchange, and asking her to account for what was discussed during them, she told him her memory of those conversations was unclear. She offered to come into the station and manually go through her messages in order to fill in the gaps she could not account for verbally. That meeting was never arranged. She never returned. No investigator followed up on the offer she had made. What makes that absence of memory remarkable is what surrounded it. In those same recorded sessions, her recall of earlier events was sharp, organized, and detailed. She remembered specific locations from weeks prior. She remembered specific dates and specific conversations from the months before August with clarity and precision. Her account of events from July 2018 was coherent and specific. Her memory of the single most consequential night in the entire case, the night the family was reported missing, the night a statewide alert was active, the night their photographs were on television, was, in her own documented words, unclear. When Kobach pressed her further, asking why she had been unable to sleep that night, why the calls had continued into the early morning hours, and why she had described herself during those hours as frightened, she gave an answer that is now part of the official record. She said she was scared. She said she kept asking Chris where his family was. She said the calls represented her effort to be reassured that everything was all right. Her stated explanation for why she was not more alarmed was that she had assumed Shanann had simply gone to stay with a friend following an argument between them. A temporary situation, space between a couple, nothing serious. 2 hours and 36 minutes of calls on a night when the police were already involved. A statewide alert had been issued, and 3 people were officially listed as missing persons, explained by an assumption that a wife had temporarily gone to a friend's house after a disagreement. The level of distress she herself described during those hours does not correspond to the explanation she offered for why she believed the situation existed. You do not spend the early hours of the morning on repeated calls across nearly 3 hours because a wife stepped out to clear her head. The fear she described and the reason she gave for that fear do not occupy the same emotional register. Then came the moment that sits at the center of the documented phone record from that night. At 1:51 in the morning, Kessinger called Chris. At 1:58, while that call was still active, Chris began receiving incoming calls from the Frederick Police Department. They ended their call. Chris called the officer back at 2:05 in the morning using his work phone. Within seconds of that police call connecting, within seconds of a law enforcement officer beginning to speak directly with the man at the center of an active missing persons investigation, Nichole Kessinger called Chris's personal phone. Both lines were live simultaneously. The officer on his work phone, Kessinger on his personal phone, at 2 o'clock in the morning, while Shanann Watts and her daughters were still officially listed as missing. Investigators who reviewed that sequence noted what the timing suggests. She was on that line at the exact moment law enforcement was speaking with him, in a position to monitor what the officer was asking and track how Chris was responding in real time. She has never been formally asked to explain why she called back at that precise moment. The 2:05 call was the last documented contact between Nichole Kessinger and Chris Watts. Shortly after that call ended, she cleared what remained on her phone before surrendering the device to investigators. Every piece of that sequence, the timing, the duration, the simultaneous calls, the final clearing of the phone, is drawn from the official discovery record. None of it was disputed. All of it was confirmed, and the question of what those 2 hours and 36 minutes contained has never been answered, because the offer she made to return to the station and go through the record was never followed up on by the investigation. On October 30th, 2018, Detective Michael Prill submitted his forensic report to the Weld County District Attorney's Office. That report stood apart from every other document in the discovery file in terms of what it identified, what it confirmed, and what it left explicitly unresolved. Prill went through her search history in specific detail. He flagged the clearing of critical data. He confirmed that Chris had been communicating with Kessinger through a hidden application installed on his phone, one designed to appear on the surface as a standard calculator but functioning as a concealed platform through which photographs were being sent and received entirely outside any normal message thread, visible to a casual inspection of the device. Tracing the full content of those exchanges would have required a separate and targeted investigative process. That process never happened. He documented her use of Skype, a platform with its own independent message infrastructure, separate from standard SMS records and requiring its own distinct legal process to access. Those records were never requested. He documented Chris's confirmed use of Snapchat, a platform designed by its architecture to automatically remove messages after they have been viewed by the recipient. Those records were never subpoenaed. He also documented what he described plainly in writing as the hard limit of what the available technology could do. The forensic tools accessible to the Northern Colorado Forensic Laboratory in 2018 were not capable of fully extracting data from Apple devices. Prill stated this directly in his official report. He estimated that hundreds of messages, and potentially a number significantly beyond that, were permanently beyond the reach of what that laboratory's equipment could recover at the time. The investigation was declared complete with that technological limit still in place, and that data still sitting beyond the reach of the tools used to examine it. And then Prill used one word in that official government document submitted formally to the District Attorney of Weld County to describe Kessinger's voicemails and her conduct across the material he had reviewed. The word he chose to place in an official forensic report about a woman the prosecution had classified as a cooperative and credible witness was creepy. That is a forensic detective's documented language. That is the word that appears in an official submission to the prosecutor who built this case. It was written down. It was submitted. It became part of the record. And it has never been formally addressed in any public proceeding connected to this case. If this is your first time watching Brian Crime TV, take a moment right now to subscribe and turn on notifications. This channel goes where the official record stops and follows the evidence that was documented, confirmed, and then set aside without resolution. Like this video, so that more people who have been asking these same questions for years can find this series. Because what comes next in this outline is the part of the record that received the least public attention and carries the most weight. 7 days after Prill filed that report, 7 days after its contents moved through standard legal procedure and almost certainly reached Chris Watts through his defense counsel at the Weld County Jail, he entered his guilty plea. November 6, 2018. No trial. No cross-examination. No courtroom. No moment where Nichole Kessinger could have been placed under oath in front of a defense attorney who had read every word of what Prill documented about the hidden application, the unexamined platforms, the unrecovered data, and the specific word he chose to put in an official document beside her name. To be precise about the timeline, Prill's report was submitted October 30th, 2018. Following the standard process by which discovery materials move from the district attorney's office through the court to defense counsel and then to the defendant, Chris Watts very likely had access to every page of it within days of its submission, while he was being held at Weld County Jail. On November 6th, 1 week after that report was filed, he pleaded guilty to all charges. The death penalty had been a possibility throughout the proceedings. It was removed not at the initiative of Watts or his legal team, but because Shanann's family asked for it. They did not want another life taken in the course of this case. The district attorney sought their approval before agreeing to that condition. That decision was theirs to make, and it was made out of the same grace that defined how that family conducted themselves throughout the most devastating period of their lives. But the consequence of that decision was permanent and structural. No trial meant no courtroom. No courtroom meant no witness stand. No witness stand meant no moment where the full weight of what the discovery file contained could be brought to bear in a formal legal proceeding with testimony given under oath. Everything the investigation had documented, every anomaly, every contradiction, every forensic flag, every unanswered question, every platform that was never subpoenaed, every record that was never requested, every gap that Prill had put into writing and submitted to the prosecutor stayed exactly where it was. Confirmed, documented, unresolved. The 30-day window between Prill's report and the sentencing closed every door that had been open. Before the plea, Chris had offered investigators an alternative account of what had happened inside that house. He told them he had witnessed Shanann harm the girls and that he had acted in a state of rage in response. He attempted to position himself as someone reacting to a crisis rather than the deliberate origin of one. The physical evidence did not support that version of events, and investigators did not accept it. But the pattern it reflected, placing responsibility for the events onto the women around him, is documented in his earliest statements to law enforcement and is the same pattern that Dylan Tolman describes observing from inside the prison environment years later. On November 19, 2018, 2 weeks after the guilty plea, Judge Marcelo Kopkow sentenced Watts at the Weld County District Court. The judge had spent 17 years on that bench and had worked through thousands of criminal cases across that career. When he addressed the court that morning, he said directly that this was the most inhumane and devastating crime he had encountered in his entire time on the bench. He imposed 5 life terms without the possibility of parole, an additional 48 years for the unlawful termination of Shanann's pregnancy, and 36 years for the charges connected to the treatment of the remains. Chris Watts will die inside that facility. There is no legal mechanism by which he leaves. At that same sentencing, DA Michael Rourke addressed Nichole Kessinger's role in the case from the podium of an official court proceeding. He described her information as a bombshell that helped build the prosecution's case against Watts. He described Chris as a man who appeared to have had every intention of starting a new life with her. That language was spoken in open court. It became part of the official record. A prosecutor does not use that framing about someone he believed had no awareness of what was forming around them. That is not the language of describing an incidental witness. That is the language of describing someone whose presence and position were understood to be central to what Chris Watts was planning and why he planned it. 1 week between Prill's report and the guilty plea. 2 weeks from the plea to the sentencing. Every door that might have led toward a trial, toward sworn testimony, toward formal cross-examination of every person connected to this case, closed inside that 30-day window. And the discovery file, with everything it contained and everything it acknowledged it could not reach, was sealed inside the conclusion of a case that ended without a trial. Now consider where Nichole Kessinger has been since that conclusion. In late 2018, she left the state of Colorado. She gave a single interview to the Denver Post in which she described herself as a person who had been manipulated and misled by Chris Watts. She said she had not known the truth about who she was involved with. That was the last time she spoke on the record about any aspect of this case. She has not spoken publicly since. In October 2020, Netflix released its documentary on this case, bringing it to an entirely new audience of millions of viewers worldwide. That same month, within the same 30-day window as the documentary's release, Kessinger filed a legal application to change her name in Jefferson County, Colorado. The documentary arrived, and the name change followed in the same calendar month. That sequence is part of the public record. It is not an inference or an interpretation. The filing exists. The timing is documented. In January 2025, she appeared briefly in video footage from a funeral service held in Billings, Montana. The service was for the mother of a friend. Online researchers identified her from a few seconds of footage that had not been directed at her. The appearance was not intentional, and the footage was not sought out for that purpose. In February 2026, the Daily Mail published a report examining her current circumstances and whereabouts. A privacy expert named Alec Harris spoke directly to the question of how she has maintained her privacy for this length of time. He said it is not a small task to successfully remain undetected in the current information environment. He said it requires a level of effort and specific knowledge that most people do not possess. He described what she is likely using as a combination of a post office box for her address, multiple phone numbers, and specific financial arrangements designed to prevent her name from appearing in standard searches. The report indicated she may currently be living under the name Nichole Miller, 8 years outside any formal investigative process, 8 years outside any official accountability for anything documented in that discovery file. Now, here is what the district attorney actually said, stated precisely and completely, not in the version that has been simplified in public coverage. Michael Rourke made a legal determination in 2018 that the evidence available at that specific moment in time did not meet the threshold required to move forward with charges against Nichole Kessinger. That is a prosecutorial decision. It was made at a point before the January 2018 search was independently examined with the weight it deserved. It was made before Skype records were ever formally requested. It was made before Snapchat was subpoenaed. It was made before the technological limit Prill documented in his report was treated as a starting point for continued investigation rather than a stopping point for the investigation that already existed. A prosecutorial decision not to charge is not an acquittal. Courts issue acquittals following trials and legal proceedings. This was not a court finding. It is not a legal declaration of innocence. Rourke did not state that she was innocent. He stated that the evidence at that moment did not support charges. Those are two different statements. The distance between them is where every unanswered question in this case continues to exist, unresolved and unaddressed. He called her information a bombshell. He said Chris intended to build a new life with her. He described her role in the prosecution's case as significant. He did not say she was innocent. And in the years since that determination was made, the technological capacity to examine what Prill confirmed as beyond reach in 2018 has changed substantially. The tools available to forensic investigators in 2026 operate significantly beyond what existed when Prill wrote his report and documented the hard limit of what could be recovered. Data he confirmed as permanently inaccessible under 2018 conditions may not be permanently inaccessible today. The Skype records were never requested. The content moved through the hidden calculator application was never fully traced. The Snapchat records were never subpoenaed. All of that is in the official report. All of it was acknowledged by the law enforcement detective who submitted that report to the district attorney. None of it was pursued, and the prosecutorial determination that closed the investigation was made while all of those avenues remained unexamined. Now, in 2026, a published book is on sale with a description that states Chris Watts admitted to having an accomplice. Not suggested. Not implied by circumstantial inference. Written in the book's own published description and attributed directly to the man who spent 7 months in the cell next to Chris Watts, the man who drove that truck to CERVI 319, the man who managed everything that followed, the man who pleaded guilty 1 week after a forensic detective filed a report that put a pointed and specific word in an official document beside the name of the one person who has never been placed under oath in connection with any of this. That word is in the record. That report is in the discovery file. That guilty plea came 7 days after the report was submitted. That name change came in the same month the documentary reached millions of new viewers. Those calls lasted 2 hours and 36 minutes on the night the family was reported missing. That cell tower connected once and only once. That photograph request had no precedent in months of documented communication. That parking lot footage was never verified. That clock-in time was never asked about. Those platforms were never subpoenaed. That technological limit was accepted as a conclusion rather than treated as a beginning. 10 documented gaps. One word in a published book that has never appeared in any official legal record connected to this case. One person who has never formally answered for any of it under oath in a courtroom in front of a defense attorney who had read every page of what the forensic record contained. That is where this case stands in 2026. Not because the evidence was insufficient to raise the question, because the question was raised by the evidence, confirmed by the investigation's own documentation, and then set aside at the moment a guilty plea removed the mechanism by which it might have been formally pursued. The next part of this series examines the specific moments inside Kessinger's recorded interviews that researchers who have spent years with this discovery file identify as the clearest missed opportunities in the entire investigation. It also examines what legal options, if any, remain available in 2026 when the primary conviction is secured, but the investigation that surrounded it never fully closed. The questions that exist in this case did not disappear when Chris Watts was sentenced. They were preserved exactly as they were, inside a file that confirmed them, documented them, and moved on. Before you leave, this channel needs one thing from you. Go to the comments right now and leave one question, not a theory, not speculation about what you believe happened. Just the single piece of documented evidence from everything covered in this series that you believe deserves a formal official answer and has never received one. Brian Crime TV reads every comment in this series. Every question is treated seriously. Because unlike the people who had this evidence directly in front of them, confirmed it, documented it, and moved forward without pursuing it, this channel does not move on from questions the record has already raised. Subscribe to Brian Crime TV right now and turn on notifications so you are here the moment the next part of this series drops. Like this video before you go. It costs you nothing, and it puts this documented evidence in front of people who have been asking these same questions for years without finding a channel willing to follow the record all the way to where it actually leads. The discovery file has been sitting there for nearly 8 years. Everything in it was put there by law enforcement. Everything presented in this series came from that record. And the only thing that has ever stood between those documents and the answers they point toward is the decision to stop asking.